Notre Dame fans, welcome back to Irish Breakdown. It is Sunday night. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight.
Yeah, we are.
Dario, the football analyst at irishbreakdown.com. I'm Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher. And tonight, we took a little bit of poll, Vince. Even though the United States of America is not a democracy, we are a republic. I do believe when it comes to some things, democracy should be taken into account. So we did a poll about whether or not people wanted to talk about Navy or if they wanted to look at the wild weekend of college football and look at the college football playoff ranking. There's a reason, however, why we put that poll up. So Vince and I both broke down the game today, and honestly, there just wasn't a lot new. We had the things that we talked about last night confirmed, and it just would have been a lot of regurgitating what we talked about last night. I went back and watched some of the schemes that Navy did. There wasn't a lot different. There was a couple little variances, but it doesn't explain what we saw. It didn't really change anything. Defensively, it was just as good on the rewatch as it was the first time.
Yeah.
Confirmed, I thought about the multiplicity and the diversity and did I play that up too much? Just wonder, because those are all the things that I think about when we do when we rewatch the game is to try to see if there's something we discussed last night after the game that we see differently. That's the whole premise of the show. And I tried.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you one thing that I did notice as I was watching. You can tell that this Navy team is young and inexperienced in triple because their triple was less complex than the high school team that I cover. Because
they didn't have a lot of things they could turn to, yeah.
Right. The high school team that I cover has a 3-year starter at quarterback. He's been doing it a long, and you can tell he's calling plays by himself, all of that. Navy's not there yet. No. And even though it's a college program versus a high school program, they're not there yet. And so when I was rewatching it, I was even more reminded of the fact that it was a very basic game plan. It was a very basic triple option.
They just didn't have a lot of things they could turn to. And I think the way that Notre Dame played, I don't think Notre Dame left them with many options. That seemed to be and you could just see the way that Ken Niumatalolo was reacting last night, that he was really frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
There just wasn't anything he could dial up. Right. And there just isn't a whole lot new for us to talk about. And the one thing we always want to do is be fresh and be new and not just regurgitate the same things we did last night. So we left it up, and it was overwhelming that people wanted to talk about the college football playoff and just the wild weekend. So what we're going to do tonight is sort of what we did last Tuesday before the college football playoff rankings come out, which is kind of we'll discuss the weekend of college football and how it impacts Notre Dame and how Notre Dame should be ranked and should be viewed, how Notre Dame's overall resume was impacted this weekend, because it definitely was.
Oh, no doubt.
And then we'll do our rankings, and we're going to compare, why we moved Notre Dame where we moved Notre Dame. So it's going to be – I'm looking forward to this. Vince has been Vince is usually like at 8 o'clock. He's like – no, Vince is fired up tonight. So
got that extra hour of sleep, Brian.
Oh yeah, I'm excited about this. So Vince, let's just dive right into this. And this was a huge weekend for Notre Dame, and it has nothing to do with beating a 2-7 Navy team. No. Yes, it was nice that Notre Dame won by 28. It was nice that it was a convincing win. I think that score late in the second quarter is going to be huge, because 17-3 looks a whole lot different than 10-3. The committee made a comment how they were just only up on North Carolina 17-13 last week, and all that other type of stuff. But when you looked at it, that was big. They kind of blew Navy out in the second half. It was a really, just statistically, it was almost over a 250-yard difference in yards. It was a dominant performance. That certainly – it's good to watch Notre Dame blow a team out, but Notre Dame's resume got better this week because of what happened everywhere else.
Right.
And there was sort of an inside straight that happened for Notre Dame, with the exception of Cincinnati losing to a bad team or, something like that. Like,
would have been great.
But those are like, okay, I'm not going to predict that Ohio State gets beat by Nebraska. Right. Yeah, it'd be great, but they stink. Exactly. Just like, it'd been great if LSU would have pulled off that upset. But as we talked about during the show last night, LSU's not pulling off this upset. They're just not a good team.
No.
There were the 3 games really that were important for Notre Dame. Number one, it was the first 2 were obvious. It was Michigan State and Purdue.
No doubt.
And then the second one was also obvious, Wake Forest and North Carolina.
Yeah.
The third was Wisconsin and Rutgers. And the reason that game was important is because when you look at Wisconsin last week, Wisconsin sort of in that danger zone. They're at 21, and they're in a situation where they've got to, if they want to, Notre Dame needs them to basically keep climbing up the rankings. And as the committee has said in the past, they're going to look at margin of victory.
Right.
Well, Wisconsin checked in at 21 last week, and their final 4 games are Rutgers at home on the road, Northwestern at home, Nebraska at home, and at Minnesota.
Should blow out every one of those teams.
Should. Right? If that happens, all of a sudden Wisconsin jumps into the top 15. So margin of victory for them is going to matter. So then you look at number one, number 2, Minnesota losing was huge, because now there's a good chance again if Wisconsin can beat Minnesota, and that's not a given because Minnesota doesn't stink, but if Wisconsin keeps playing the way they're playing right now, that's a game you'd think that they could win. And then you say, okay, well now they got a chance to be the West champs. There's also still a chance if Minnesota loses and Wisconsin loses again, that now Purdue could be the Western champs because of what happened this weekend. So, and then of course, Notre Dame played Purdue and Notre Dame played North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina loses to Wake Forest, and all of a sudden they're 4-5. If Purdue loses to Michigan State, now all of a sudden they're 5-4, and they got to go play Ohio State this next weekend.
Right.
All of a sudden, Notre Dame's resume is looking not good. But because those 2 teams won, now all of a sudden Notre Dame has 2 6-3 wins, potentially 2 top 25 teams on their resume, depending on what they do with Purdue. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Purdue right now. Then you look at North Carolina now winning. Now Notre Dame has an additional win over a team that's over 500, which the committee looks at wins over teams that are over 500. And so now Notre Dame, Michigan, and Michigan State all have 3-1 records against teams that are over 500. Last week, Notre Dame didn't have as impressive as a resume. So those 3 things were huge for Notre Dame. What was also big for Notre Dame is not so much that other teams lost, because Alabama didn't lose, Ohio State didn't lose, Oregon didn't lose, Cincinnati didn't lose, but they all played like crap.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Notre Dame's not going to pass any of those teams, nor should they yet.
But
they gained on them.
Yeah, the gap is closing.
That's the key.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was
then when they do lose, because I do feel like Cincinnati, maybe they don't lose, but I just feel like they're so close to losing that they're going to stub their toe eventually. Ohio State has an opportunity to lose, obviously. Oklahoma has an opportunity. I mean, everybody above them has an opportunity to lose. And so when that happens, or if that happens, Notre Dame has closed the gap so that they will then jump those teams, even the undefeated ones potentially, with Notre Dame's 1 loss. So it does affect Notre Dame. It does. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm really interested to see what you've got for your top.
Because we did not talk about our rankings. We did, because we thought it'd be more fun to talk about it where we kind of like what we're going to do tonight is we're going to kind of build it around the way the college football playoff does it. Our rankings are done the way that they do it, which is I don't look at last week's top 25 is thrown out. It's not based off that. It's every week looking at the resumes fresh. And so that's what we do. But we also kind of like doing it where, like there's the big reveal, So I don't know what Vince's ranking. He doesn't know what mine are. And then also because Vince needs to not have his arguments picked apart before we get to it. So that was his words, not mine. That was his thing. He's like, I don't want you to convince me that I'm wrong before the show even starts.
I'm easily convinced.
So, so that's why we did it too. But Vince, it was with the exception of just the most chaotic weekend ever, which is Ohio State loses, which it almost got to that point. I mean, Ohio State, if Nebraska wasn't just terrible, they might have beaten Ohio State because they lost 26-17, right? Or was it 27-16? But Nebraska missed 2 field goals and had multiple chances to win. Tulsa had 2 chances inside the 5-yard line to beat Cincinnati. Washington gave Oregon a game for like a little bit, but LSU had multiple opportunities to beat Alabama. It was almost literally the absolute perfect weekend for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what was so crazy about it. But even though it wasn't the perfect weekend, it was still a great weekend for Notre Dame. Convincing win. A bunch of couple teams in front of them lost, and a bunch of teams in front of them had bad weeks. Here's another thing that helped Notre Dame. I'm going to tell you what happened this weekend to Michigan's resume. Okay, because remember, it's a little preview. Last week I had Michigan ranked ahead of Notre Dame, if you'll recall correctly. And I made the case for why Michigan should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. But as I said, every week is a new resume. Michigan had more wins over top 20 over teams with 500. That's changed because of this weekend. I said that Michigan's had a opponent record was better than Notre Dame's. That changed this weekend. Here's what happened to Michigan's schedule. Western Michigan lost. Washington lost. Northern Illinois lost. Rutgers lost. Wisconsin won. Nebraska lost. Northwestern lost. Michigan State lost. And Indiana lost to Michigan.
To them.
Their opponents went 1-8 this weekend. That blew up their strength of schedule big time. That's how into the weeds you got to get when you look at this. It's not just like the lame AP and coaches polls where they just like, what happened this weekend? Okay, that's going to shake up everything, right? It's about looking at the whole thing in context. And you
went deep. I did not go that deep.
Yeah,
I did not go that deep. I think we may have accidentally fell on the same conclusion, but I did not go that deep. I will be the first one to admit that.
Yeah. So that's kind of where this weekend was. I mean, that's just what made it a really, really wild weekend. So we're gonna dive into where we rank Notre Dame, why we rank Notre Dame there. But then at the end, JP Buhlsfeld, my guy JP, who was at the game this weekend, what is your prediction for Notre Dame on Tuesday? We'll get that afterwards. So we'll do sort of a predicting where things are going to be afterwards. We have a super chat here before we dive into our top 25 from John Nestler. Guys, love the show. I watch it with my wife every night before bed. You helped me convert her from an Alabama fan to an Irish fan. Thank you. You are most welcome.
You are welcome. We're done. We're done here.
I kind of feel, though, like if you make her listen to us every night before you go to bed, it's almost kind of like you waterboard her every night. You know what I mean? It's like convert, or I'm going to make you listen to these guys every night. You know, sort of like a I don't know, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of torture.
You were trying to avoid the word torture. I could tell, but
there's no other way to do it.
The fact that my
psychological
wife,
warfare. You commit psychological warfare on your wife every night and make her listen to us until we convert her. Yeah.
The fact that my wife, the woman that actually agreed to marry me in real life, tells me to be quiet at night, pretty much says it all. So I mean,
that's a little different, though. I think if John was sitting there talking about Notre Dame for an hour before bed, she'd be like, "Dude, shut up."
Yeah, right. Yeah,
it's a little different. Different. I'm the lucky one whose wife was actually listening to the show right now. Like, so I'm in the rare minority. So,
but it's not true for me.
So Vince, let's dive into our top 11. So each week we're going to just rank the teams that we think are still in it. Okay, and that are in it contention. Last week we ranked 12.
Right.
This week we're ranking 11. Now it's not guaranteed to always get smaller and smaller and smaller. If there's a bunch of chaos these next couple of weeks, all of a sudden Texas A&M could jump back in with 2 losses, right? I mean, but right now they're not in that conversation.
Right.
So right now we're going to look and say, here's the 11 teams that we think still have some degree of an opportunity to make the college football playoff.
Correct.
And so we're going to go 11 to we're going to go actually do you want to go get our top 4 out now, or do you want to start at 11 and then work our way up?
Let's go to the bottom.
Let's go 11 and work our way up.
Yeah, let's go bottom up.
I have a feeling the first 2 are going to be the same, but we'll go. I have Wake Forest 11.
Me too.
Okay.
Because they still do have a shot because they are leading their division, right? So they still could be in the ACC championship. And if they're an ACC champion, they've got a shot. I mean, that was the point, right? They
need so much incredible chaos, but yes, they are still in it. Yes,
but they have a shot. So that's why we're not doing a top 10. We're doing a top 11.
Right.
So yeah, that's who I have number 11 as well.
Number 10, Oklahoma State.
That's who I have as well. Okay. And the reason I have Oklahoma State above Wake Forest is because their win over Baylor is better than any of Wake Forest's wins.
Yeah, I would argue that Oklahoma State has multiple wins that are better than anything that Wake Forest has done. So, I mean, I think their win over Kansas State is better. I mean, Kansas State 6-3 football team. And here's the thing about Kansas State too. Kansas State is a pretty good football team when their quarterback Skylar Thompson's healthy.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I don't believe that Skylar Thompson played against Oklahoma State, so that kind of factors into it. but that's still a good win. The Baylor win is also better, and then I think that's kind of better than anything Wake Forest has done, if I'm being honest with you.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
So
it still puts them at 10.
Yep.
And so we're definitely on the same page there. So
now again, these are our rankings.
Right.
These are our rankings.
And we didn't go off of last week's, because that was a thing with me. I wanted to make sure. I talked to Brian. I said, okay, are we going off of the committee's last week's rankings to get to this week's rankings, or are we just starting fresh? And if we just popped into the college football world, looked at everybody's resumes, how we would rank them. And it's the latter. It's a fresh ranking, has nothing to do with last week, whether it was our rankings or the committee's rankings or anything. So it's one of,
because that's what the committee says they do.
Yes.
Is they start fresh from every week, and it's like a completely brand new poll.
Right.
So I didn't even look at my top 12.
I don't even remember what I said from last week.
Number 9.
Michigan.
Okay. Yep.
I have Michigan. Yeah.
Okay.
And
which isn't a big leap for you, because you had Michigan 8. You had Michigan 9 last week.
I had them 9 last week, didn't I? Yeah. I have them 9 because, and I have them behind Notre Dame. And my argument for that is that Michigan's loss is now worse than Notre Dame's loss.
Yeah. I still think that line of ranking is still, to me, flawed. Because to me, when you've played 9 games, I don't think a team should be evaluated on what they did on their worst day.
Fair enough.
And that's important. And because if we get down to it, and Cincinnati's 12-1 or 13-1 or 12-1 or 13-0, and you're going to compare them to Notre Dame, because Notre Dame clearly has a worse loss than Cincinnati, because Cincinnati never lost.
Right.
It's got to be about the totality of your
strength of schedule. Right. If I was taking it to the next level, Notre Dame's strength of schedule is now, I think, a lot better than Michigan's now.
It is now.
As we sit here today, it's better
because of last weekend. So I mean, when your schedule goes 1-8 in a weekend, that hurts. Whereas I'm trying to do the math here real quickly. Notre Dame's opponents went 4-5. Right. And if you want to say the teams that didn't play Notre Dame, Michigan's were 1-7, Notre Dame's were 4-4. But there were some big wins in there. Purdue had a huge win. North Carolina had a huge win. Wisconsin had a big win. And Cincinnati, and then obviously Cincinnati won again.
I think Purdue those has wins over the number 2 and the number 3 team in the country at that time.
Right.
At the time of playing of the game. And I think that, Purdue still has some tough games ahead of them. But if they ended up being ranked, obviously that would help Notre Dame as well. And I think they have
which Purdue has a chance to do, and that matters too. But you can only have that conversation after they beat Michigan State. It was useless to have that conversation last week. They had back-to-back games against Michigan State and Ohio State coming up. I mean, there's no reason to have a conversation about 5-3 Purdue when they're coming when they've got that coming up.
And I think they have the opportunity to be ranked in the 20s this week.
Right.
And obviously, if they beat Ohio State, they're going to be
ranked. Of course. That's a no-brainer.
That's a no-brainer.
But if they can at least be competitive with Ohio State, they could stay. Or at least be just outside. And then they finish their season with a neutral site game against Northwestern, who's terrible. Right. And a home game against Indiana, who's terrible. Now, the way Purdue has played this weekend, there are no guarantees.
Right.
I mean, they barely beat Illinois. They lost to Minnesota at home. I mean, they're kind of a little schizophrenic a little bit.
Yeah.
But, I thought they were convincing in their win over Nebraska. Nebraska scored late to make it a 5-point game, and Purdue turned it over on downs at one point when they were getting ready to just really blow Nebraska out. They controlled that game. So now all of a sudden Purdue's got a chance to be in that conversation. But so now the reason that matters, and when you compare it to Michigan, because I have Michigan 9, which dropped them, I believe, 2 spots for me.
Okay.
Is because their overall. So last week, Michigan's opponent record was something like, trying to think, it was like 38-27. Well, you look at adding the 1-7 or the 1-8 of their opponents, plus the fact that they now added a team like Indiana to their resume, who's 2-7, right? Instead, Notre Dame did too, but that really closed the gap to where now their opponent record is now 41-41.
Okay, yeah, I was right.
And Notre Dame's is 43-38. Notre Dame was 1 win behind, so Notre Dame was 1 loss. Notre Dame's was 37-28. Michigan's was 38-27. No, 37-27, and then 38-27. So Notre Dame was 1 win behind last week. But that was better. And then when you looked at Michigan's resume last week, they had the better MAC wins. They were more convincing in their win over Wisconsin. That was the resume. Better strength of schedule. They had a better record against teams that were that were ranked in these type of things. And then, but a lot of that's gone now. Michigan State, Notre Dame all have 3-1 records against teams that are over 500. Here's the difference now. Because of this past weekend, Michigan's 3 wins over teams that were ranked, or that teams that have a win over or record over 500, are now Western Michigan, Northern Illinois, and I'm trying to find Michigan's schedule here. Let's see here. I'm trying to find their 3rd win. I'm drawing Wisconsin, right? Where Notre Dame's are all Power 5 teams. True. It's Purdue, it's Wisconsin, it's now North Carolina.
Right.
So now that starts to – so now you've got some things swinging in Notre Dame's favor.
Absolutely.
To where now this week, I could argue that Notre Dame has a better resume than Michigan did, which a week ago I did not believe that was the case. And that's why I like the way the committee just kind of just starts all over. We got something here real quick. JP Buellsfeld, super chat for Mrs. Driscoll for creating an awesome son in so many ways. She will appreciate that because they might actually be listening to the show. They're usually work late at night on Sundays because they run a business and getting paperwork ready before we go. BAO 2104, guys, thank you for the super chat, JP. Yes, and BAO. Guys, love the topic. It's a bummer we didn't just take care of business of Cincinnati when we had the chance. I really feel like we'd beat them now pretty handily. Do we jump a one-loss Cincinnati team? We'll get there.
I do believe we would beat them pretty handily.
Yes.
Notre Dame would beat. I don't get to play. Notre Dame would beat them pretty handily. I do agree.
Yeah. We may be able to run the ball on some of the teams Notre Dame has faced recently, but we're not beating Cincinnati by ourselves. But we'll get there. I promise. But that's why I now have Notre Dame over Michigan. And so that's why Michigan is my 9. Who is your number 8?
Notre Dame. I have Notre Dame 8. I have Notre Dame 8. And I'll explain why I have
Michigan State 8 and Notre Dame 7. So let's get into that now.
7. So
explain to me why you have Michigan State ahead of Notre Dame.
Well, it's a little bit of the eyeball test. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit, I realize they lost to Purdue and Notre Dame beat Purdue pretty handily. I get that part.
Because it can't just be about one game. It can't be that simplified.
It can't just be
transitive property of we. Right, you're right.
And I didn't dive as far into Michigan State's schedule as I'm sure you did, because I think you're probably going to have a very similar argument to the Michigan schedule.
It's exactly the same. It's the same one minus the bad loss thing because I don't use that.
And fair enough. So I understand where you're coming from, but I took it to the next level. For me, is the eyeball test, and right now I still feel like Michigan State is the better team at the moment. And I think the problem with Notre Dame's offense that past week it didn't help me in my mental frame.
But I'll ask this: who played worse, Notre Dame's offense or Michigan State's defense that gave up over about 600 yards against Purdue?
I've never been a fan of Michigan State's defense.
But that's kind of part of it, right? If you're going to bring Notre Dame's offense, you got to say, okay, well, what about the worst part of the other side?
I agree.
And then Notre Dame's defense played better than Michigan State's offense, which has been Michigan State's strength.
I would worry about Notre Dame's defense versus Michigan State's offense right now.
Yeah, I don't know if I would be, just because I believe a team that runs like that doesn't scare me as much, and they're not great at pass protection, in my opinion. And the things they do good defensively are not things that give Notre Dame's offense problems. So I say this: I'd be a lot more concerned as a Michigan State fan about Notre Dame's offense, right? Or excuse me, if you look at the two weaknesses, right? The Notre Dame offense against the Michigan State defense,
right?
I like the matchup of Notre Dame offense against the Michigan State defense. Like, to me, I like that matchup.
I do too, because Michigan State's secondary is god awful, and that's why I had Purdue beating Michigan State in the first place.
But Michigan State's offense against Notre Dame's defense is a matchup of Notre Dame's strength, right? So that's kind of where I come from on it. I think that matchup, to me, let me just say this: if I were to grant your premise that Michigan State's offense is better than Notre Dame's defense, just like, and you didn't say that, but I'm just
right.
I would say the gap between those two is significantly closer than the gap between the Notre Dame offense and the Michigan State defense.
I'll grant that. Here's my
and it'd be on a neutral field, right?
Here's my initial as I would think about these teams going up against each other, right? We're going to talk about matchups and we're going to talk about all that fun stuff that we normally do in the week leading up, right? My issue with Notre Dame's defense would be, yes, they played excellent against Navy. They played excellent against Navy. I have no qualms about the way Notre Dame played against Navy. But the last time that they played a regular offense, they didn't play very well. And so for me, I need to see them play against another regular offense and do well for me to gain my confidence. Not that I don't think the defense is good, because I do. I need to see them be better against a regular offense again before I start to get more confident.
But you could make the same case about Michigan State's defense, which has gotten shredded the last 2 weeks.
Oh, I think Michigan State's defense has got awful.
Right.
There's no two ways.
Here's where I'm at, Vince. For my number one strength of the opponent record, Notre Dame's 43-38, Michigan State's 37-38. I do not count Youngstown State. I do not count FCS teams.
That's fair.
in that resume.
And the committee shouldn't either.
Right.
But
Michigan State has only played one team in the top 25, and they won. Right. It was
right.
And they're 3-1 against teams that are ranked that have a record above 500. Again, only FBS teams. Their 3 wins over teams with a winning record are Miami, Western Kentucky, and Michigan. Right now, they have a better win, but I'll sit here and argue all day that their second and third wins are Notre Dame's second and third wins are better than Michigan State's. Part of it is because Notre Dame's third best win beat Michigan State's second best win, Miami. Unless you want to argue that 5-4 Western Kentucky is better than 5-4 Miami, right? Where Notre Dame, obviously, Wisconsin is still the best win on ranking. Purdue is a much better win for Notre Dame than beating Miami is, in my opinion. And the North Carolina win is significantly better than the West Kentucky win. That's how I look at it.
Okay.
And then when you consider that Michigan State has an opponent record, and you talk about eyeball test, I think if you look into the early in the season, I think Michigan State was playing well. The reason I would kind of push back is because Michigan State's had some of the same issues that Notre Dame has had. They have a 3-point win over Nebraska in which they were severely outplayed by Nebraska in every way except for the fact that Nebraska does what Nebraska always does, which is just piss games away. Nebraska could be a 7-win team right now if they weren't coached in a poor manner and weren't completely undisciplined. But Nebraska severely outplayed Michigan State in that game. Nebraska in that game had 430 yards. Michigan State had 254. Just kept turning the ball over. I mean, severely outplayed them. And then you look at they had obviously a good win over Western Kentucky, 18-point win over Rutgers. Then they had a 5-point win over Indiana where they didn't play well. They had to come back from down 30-14 at home to beat Michigan. And then they just got stomped by Purdue. And in my opinion, the game wasn't even that close. If Purdue doesn't fumble the ball on the opening series of the third quarter, which Michigan State turned into a touchdown to make it 21-14, I don't know if that game ever even ended up being as close as it was.
It wasn't close. I watched a lot of that game, and it wasn't close. I mean, it was not a close game. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're talking about one spot in the bottom of the top 10.
But I think that spot matters.
Well, it does matter, but I also think that it's going to work itself out as we move forward.
Sure.
Like, this isn't the final ranking.
Right.
This is the November 9th ranking or whatever,
yes,
right?
Correct.
So I will see more. And as Notre Dame continues to improve, I hope, right? And this is a big game. This is a big test for Notre Dame, in my opinion, against Virginia, if their starting quarterback plays.
Sure.
And
we'll learn a lot more about Notre Dame than we're going to learn about
Michigan
Michigan State playing Maryland.
Absolutely.
We're going to learn a lot more about Notre Dame playing on the road at 6-3 Virginia than Michigan State playing at home against 5-4 Maryland.
Absolutely.
I just feel like some of the criteria that you use to rank Michigan where you did them, you're applying sort of an opposite standard to Michigan State. Because with Michigan State, you say, well, their loss and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, if you look at how Michigan's playing outside of that one loss, Michigan State's had more impressive wins recently than Michigan State has, right? I mean, they lost on the road to a top 10 team in a game where they kind of outplayed them for a good chunk of the game. They just lost it late. Completely different than Notre Dame, for example, who was completely outplayed for 4 quarters by Cincinnati.
They were.
So I don't think you can look at those losses the same. To me, I would rather have Michigan's loss than Notre Dame's loss.
Agreed.
Because even though the team may be better, the manner in which Michigan's played in that loss So you have to look at the entire schedule. And the fact is that Notre Dame has a better overall resume than Michigan now. And I think that the same is true of Michigan State. So that's why I had them better.
Fair
Let's
enough.
go to number 6, Vince. Who do you have at number 6?
Cincinnati.
Okay, I do
still
too.
have them number 6. Yep.
And they continue to play poorly.
Terrible.
And
I kind of wish I could drop them.
If they were playing Big Ten teams, they'd be losing right now. That's
I don't think they beat Michigan State. I don't think they beat Notre Dame again. I don't think they beat Michigan. I don't
think they beat Purdue. I mean, look, they're barely beating Tulsa, who just lost to Navy a week ago.
Correct.
They barely beat Navy. It was barely. 7. I mean, it was by 7, but Navy scored late. You know what I mean? But they didn't play well against Navy. Navy, Navy had more yards rushing against Cincinnati than they had total yards against them. So I have Cincinnati up a spot because I have them ahead of Michigan State because winning matters, right? But
I mean they're still undefeated,
right?
They're still undefeated. You have to take that into account,
right?
I just can't put them any higher than 6,
right? Now, here's where it's going to, I think, get a little interesting, Vince.
Okay.
I think these next 3 spots, I think our 1 and 2 are going to be the same because nothing changed last week. I mean, Oklahoma
we had the same 1
and
2 last week. Yeah.
Right.
They were on a bye. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And their schedule, their resume didn't have the humiliating weekend that Michigan's did, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
Number 5.
Yeah. I have Ohio State.
Okay. So do I.
At 5. Yeah.
Ohio State, to me, could have had I have Bama 4. Who do you have at 4?
Oregon.
Okay. So to me, and you could use the case for Oregon too, the way that Ohio State had been playing coming into the last 2 weeks, Vince, you and I had a lot of conversations about this, and I remember off the air about Ohio State, and I have a good buddy who's been talking a lot about Ohio State's playing so well, and I kept saying Ohio State's smashing a bunch of really bad teams.
Yes, correct.
They did not look great against Minnesota. They were losing until Minnesota's stud running back got hurt.
Yes. Oh yeah.
They got outplayed for 4 quarters by Oregon. They did
without their best defensive player.
They were beating Tulsa at halftime 13-6, right? Tulsa stinks. And then they played Akron, Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, who aren't good. And they did not play well against Penn State. And Penn State's just not good. I mean, they're not good right now.
Right.
And then this past weekend, if Nebraska was any other mediocre team, if they play if they play against Michigan State or Purdue or Michigan, the way they did against Penn State or Nebraska, I think, or Penn State or Nebraska, I think they'll lose. They're not going to lose all those games. I'm just making the point that that's how they're playing. And so to me, they had a chance to jump Bama or jump Oregon this weekend if they'd have gone on the road and blown out Nebraska. Not that Nebraska's good, but Nebraska's been giving teams that's the thing about Nebraska this year, Vince, is they're losing a lot, but for the most part, they're not losing by a lot. They lost to Illinois by 8. They lost to Oklahoma on the road by 7. They lost on the road to Michigan State by 3. They lost at home to Michigan by 3. They played 3 top 10 teams. They lost by 7, 3, and 3. Lost by Minnesota by a touchdown and Purdue by 5. That's why I say Nebraska's don't be stupid away from being a 7-3, 7-2 team right now. And then Ohio State, I mean, if you watch that game, Nebraska played them pretty even. They missed 2 field goals. They had some really dumb mistakes on offense to lose other opportunities. And they had the ball in the second half of the 4th quarter with a chance to take a lead. I'm just not impressed by what I've seen. Ohio State's played 4 teams with a pulse, and they haven't looked good in any of them. And you could say Notre Dame hasn't either, but that's why I have Ohio State ahead of Notre Dame.
Sure.
But I would say that Notre Dame has been better recently against decent teams than Ohio State has. I'm more impressed by what Notre Dame did to because you're concerned about North Carolina. I would argue that Notre Dame looked a whole lot better against North Carolina than Ohio State looked against Nebraska when you look at the quality of the opponent. You know what I mean? That would be kind of my thing. What would you just say there, Vince, about Ohio State?
Ohio State's fatal flaw is their defense. I mean, if they can
gotten any better as they played teams with a pulse, it hasn't gotten any better.
That's what I'm saying. Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
And their offense looks vulnerable when they play a defense with a pulse.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of my thing. Number 4, I have Alabama.
And I have Oregon.
Okay.
And see, I think almost
and you have Bama 3, I assume.
Yeah. Okay. So 3, 4, 5 was up for grabs for me this week. And all three of those teams struggled this week to win their games. Now, they all won, but they all struggled to win those games. And so I didn't pull out my rankings from last week, but I'm pretty sure I had the same 3, 4, 5. I might have had Ohio State ahead of Oregon because I think you yelled at me for having Ohio State.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so
I definitely won that argument.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And so I have Ohio State, then Oregon, then Alabama going up because they all struggled. And so I moved Oregon because you're right, the head-to-head should matter. But
they just outplayed Ohio State on the road for 4 quarters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But Alabama was a stone's throw away from losing to LSU, who's terrible. Ohio State could have lost to Nebraska, who's terrible. And and Oregon struggled as well.
Struggled, but I never felt like Oregon was in trouble there.
Agreed. But it was closer than it needed to be.
Sure.
And it was in a driving rainstorm and all of that. And I get
But they were up 24-9 in the fourth quarter. Washington never threatened after they made it 24-16. They never really threatened. But none of them look good, to your point. The reason I have Alabama behind Oregon, Alabama ahead of Ohio State's easy for me because Alabama has better wins. Look, I've said all year, my guy Ladarius is with us and the Alabama fans with us tonight. Look, Alabama to me is beatable. I've been saying it all year.
For sure.
This is not a typical Bama team, but they're still one of the 4 best teams in college football. And but they have not looked great in some of their wins. Tennessee, they scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. That was a competitive game until the fourth quarter. They should have lost to LSU. LSU, that was not a game of Alabama beating LSU as much as it was a game of LSU just
crap in the bed.
Yeah, choking away the game.
They had
just choking the game away the game.
Game because they got the ball back again with less than a minute to go, and they started to drive a little bit, but then the drive obviously stalled. But they had 2 opportunities to go down and at least tie the game, and they couldn't do it. It's pathetic.
Right.
Sorry, it's pathetic.
Bama got outplayed by LSU, who's just not good.
No.
They're just not, they fired they've already agreed to fire their coach. So the thing with Oregon for me too is I think Oregon, as I've said before, you have to look at Oregon differently than you look at everybody else. And this is again trying to apply the committee's reasoning. And the committee has said all along that they take special circumstances into account. And one of the special circumstances about Oregon that you have to take into account is the fact that their one loss happened on the road on a day when their offensive coordinator was rushed to the hospital and had to have emergency surgery. Right? Imagine if right before Notre Dame is about to play at Stanford in a couple weeks, Marcus Freeman gets rushed to the hospital the day of the game and has to have emergency surgery. I pray that doesn't happen, but I'm trying to make the point. If Notre Dame's defense wasn't great that day and they go in overtime and lose to that team and their offense plays uniquely different than it had really the entire year, then you'd have to take that into consideration. And I put up a tweet I responded to a tweet from our guy Chuck Freeby, who asked a question we were talking about the Stanford game on Friday night because Stanford got so incredibly embarrassed on Friday night by Utah. Utah had was it 40? How many? It was a 41, something like 40 some points, 30. It was 38-7 or something like that, and they had like 440 yards of offense to Stanford's 58 or something like that in the first half. It was super embarrassing. And somebody asked about how could they have lost to Stanford? And I made that point about, look, you have to consider this. So Chuck said, how in the world did they beat Oregon? And I said, OC Joe Moorhead got rushed to the hospital the day of the game, missed the game. They scored 24 points and averaged 5.2 yards per play in that game. If you look at the 3 games before and the 3 games after, Oregon scored 39 points per game and 7 points per play against better teams. You have to take that into account, in my opinion, which the reason I say you have to is because the committee's been very clear. They look at things like that. It's like when Clemson lost to Syracuse, who was 4-8 in 2017. The committee was like, look, their starting quarterback got knocked out in the first half. Like, that matters because Joe Moorhead is there now. It'd be different if Joe Moorhead was out for the year, right? Couldn't coach anymore this year. But he's not. That's not the case. So that's why, to me, I still feel like I have to look at Oregon being ahead of Ohio State because they have that great win, but I feel like they're doing what they need to do week after week after week. Now, their resume took a bit of a hit this weekend, though, Vince, because remember, they had put Fresno in there to be ahead of, to kind of help them out. Well, Fresno got smashed by Boise State this weekend. So now their top 25 win is now gone. Ohio State won, obviously, so they still have that win. Some things did help them, though, a little bit this weekend, and mainly Colorado, who they just pounded 2 weeks ago, went and beat Oregon State. So that helps them a little bit. But the other thing that helped Oregon this weekend, too, was Utah winning and Arizona State beating USC. Because now those two teams have 3 losses. Utah's playing really good football right now. Utah's now 6-3. They play Arizona this weekend, and then after they play Colorado, or after they play Oregon, they have to play Colorado. If Utah jumps into the ranking this week, and then they go out and kill Arizona next weekend, and Arizona is awful. Like half a Cal's team had to be out with COVID for Arizona to barely get their first win since 2019. So, you look at that. There's a chance Utah could jump into the top 25. Then you look at Arizona State, who Utah beat recently. Arizona State, who had lost 2 in a row, goes out and whoops USC. They play at Washington, at Oregon State, home against Arizona. That was a big win because if Arizona State chokes that USC game away, there's no chance they're ranked. Now, however, there's a chance that if USC beats Utah and Arizona State wins out, because Arizona State only has 2 losses in conference, Utah has 2 losses in conference, or 1 loss in conference, because Utah's other losses were out of conference. They lost to BYU and San Diego State. There's still a chance that Arizona State could get into the Pac-12 championship game.
Yeah.
So they got to kind of hope for one of those 2 things to happen. So that's going to make it interesting. That's going to help their resume a little bit. But overall, I still think just the totality of what they've done when they've been healthy and been right, I think is just better than what Alabama has done. And, because again, we could nitpick both of their resumes. And I think that Alabama gets a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt because they're in the SEC and all these other type of things. But to me, Alabama's big win is over what? It's over Ole Miss, right? Mississippi State jumped in to try to help Alabama out, and then they went and got beat this weekend.
Yeah, they'll be out. There's no way. There's no way they can. It was a stretch for them to be in the top 20 last week. There's no chance they're going to be in the top. No chance.
Right.
No chance.
Now, what they're going to do is they're going to flip Arkansas with Mississippi State because Arkansas beat them, and now Arkansas is 6-3. But Alabama hasn't played Arkansas yet, so it doesn't help their resume. It'll help their resume in a couple weeks when they play Arkansas and then out at Auburn. But then Auburn losing this weekend to Texas A&M, I actually think that was worse for Alabama because, as I've said, the committee tends to like your wins more than they like your losses. And to me, if I'm Alabama, I wanted Auburn to beat A&M because if A&M beat you, okay, it is what it is. I would much rather have a big win over a borderline top 10 Auburn team in 3 weeks than now an Auburn team that'll be catching their 4th loss in a few weeks if Bama beats them. So I think that hurt them a little bit too. But that's why I have Oregon ahead of Alabama. I think you could make the case, however, that Alabama's best 3 wins are better than Oregon's best 3 wins after you get past number 1.
Sure.
I just think that number 1's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big difference for me.
Yeah, I get that.
But so
we do have a super chat I want to get to real quick.
2 and 1 are the same though, correct? Real quick.
Oklahoma, Georgia.
Oklahoma 2 and Georgia 1, right?
I do. Yep.
Go ahead.
Oklahoma's giving me. They were on a bye, so they're giving me no reason to drop them from 2. So, and there's undefeated. If they get a loss, we're gonna have a different conversation.
Right. And no, they don't have a win as good as Cincinnati's, but they have about 6 other wins that are better than anything that Cincinnati's done.
Exactly.
With all due respect,
you have to take the total. You have to take all of that. Rick Doyle with the super chat. Thank you, Rick. He says, watch the show every day with my 14-year-old son. He played corner this year and told me, quote, Brian from IB teaches me more about football than my coach's dad, unquote. We both genuinely feel like part of the family.
I appreciate that, Rick.
That's awesome.
I appreciate that very much.
That's really
got to talk to your son's coaches, though. We got to get them on the stick, okay?
That's a really solid point.
Yeah, we got to get them going.
There's a comment in here I wanted to throw up because I thought it was an interesting one by Ghostly Barbecue, which great name, by the way. Do you think if Purdue wins against Ohio State, will Texas A&M make the playoffs And what bowl do you think Notre Dame should play in this year? More the first part than the second.
I can't get past the ghostly barbecue.
I know.
That's just, I don't even know what that means, but it just sounds really
deep.
Cool. No, I don't think. I think Purdue beating Ohio State has nothing to do with Texas A&M making the playoff.
Texas A&M already has 2 losses, right?
Correct. For Texas A&M to make the playoff,
they would have more chaos.
Bama's going to have to lose again, maybe twice. Oklahoma's going to have to lose maybe twice. Ohio State would have to lose. Michigan State would then have to lose to somebody else. Michigan's going to have to lose again. Notre Dame would have to lose. I mean, so much would have to happen.
Yeah, I don't
for
think
Texas A&M to be in. No. I don't see any scenario in which A&M is in right now.
They're not even in our top 11 at the moment. So
right now, you could make a case that they should be next. If we were to do a top 25, I would strongly consider A&M being 12 because I do like the trajectory of their team right now. I think their defense has finally figured it out. Their defense has been real inconsistent this year. I think they had that little stretch against Mississippi State, Arkansas, because I think Arkansas game would have been worse than 20-10 if KJ Jefferson doesn't get hurt. Because they were up, I think it was like 20-3, and KJ got hurt, and Arkansas's offense just kind of went into a shell and said, we're going to run the clock out because they can't score on us.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Arkansas's defense was just dominating Texas A&M. Their defense the last 3 games has been pretty good, and that 20-3 win over Auburn's impressive because Auburn's been playing really good football lately, and they thoroughly dominated that Auburn offense. Now, the problem for me is this is the first time in a few weeks that A&M's played a good defense and they struggled against Auburn. But A&M's got to play at Ole Miss and at LSU. For me, the only way that I would consider putting A&M in, here's the one scenario. They've got to win out, and they need Bama to lose to Auburn. And then they'd have to beat Georgia. And then after that, like a lot of crazy stuff would have to happen.
Sure.
The Big Ten, either
the true loss part is the hard part for me.
Right. So here's what would have to happen, in my opinion. Okay. The Pac-12 needs to get eliminated, meaning Oregon's got to lose. Okay. So let's just say Georgia wins out and then A&M beats Georgia. I think Georgia's still in, right? And then let's say I just don't see Oklahoma losing twice. So let's put Oklahoma in. Okay. Then you've got Cincinnati, you've got Notre Dame, and you've got the Big Ten, right? Because ACC's out. I think a 2-loss A&M team would probably get in over a 1-loss Wake Forest team. And it would deserve to be because if for them to have 2 losses.
Well, yeah, if they win the SEC championship with 2 losses,
right,
they're absolutely better. They would have beat
Georgia, they would have beat Bama, they would have beat Ole Miss. I mean, they'd have like 6 better wins than anything that Wake Forest has done. So you'd need the ACC's out, the Pac-12's out, right? So then you've got Cincinnati, Notre Dame, and the Big Ten. They would need Cincinnati to lose a game because I think it's the same thing about Wake Forest. A 1-loss Cincinnati team against a 2-loss A&M team. With A&M's resume compared to Cincinnati's, I would go with A&M, okay? So they need Cincinnati to lose a game or Notre Dame to lose a game. Not both. They need one of them, per se. So let's say that Cincinnati loses a game and Notre Dame wins out. Let's say Cincinnati gets crushed by SMU in a couple weeks and then, barely beat the rest of their teams. Let's just say hypothetically. So then you'd have Notre Dame in, or Cincinnati wins out, Notre Dame loses again. One of those 2 things happens, right? So either Cincinnati or Notre Dame is in. After that, you would then have the Big Ten. You would need a lot of chaos in the Big Ten. You need Ohio State to lose again. Preferably, if you're A&M, you're preferring that Purdue beats Ohio State this weekend. Because then you can cheer for Ohio State to beat Michigan State and Michigan.
Right.
If they
gives them 2 losses each,
then they all
Ohio
have
State
2
has
losses.
2 losses. They're all out.
Correct. And A&M will have won X number of games in a row, and by that point in time, A&M would have the best win in college football because they would have beaten Bama, right? So one of the best wins. So that's a lot of chaos.
A lot.
I mean, that is a lot of chaos. Now you could argue that maybe Oklahoma loses a couple. I just don't see that. So and as far as what bowl do I think Notre Dame should play in, talk to me in 3 weeks when we know how the rest of the season went.
Right.
But I mean, honestly, it's playoff or the Peach Bowl are the most likely options if Notre Dame wins out.
Correct. Yes, I did some digging on all of that, and the chances of also Notre Dame versus Cincinnati are pretty much out the window.
Well, they're not completely opposed to a rematch in a New Year's Six. Not completely opposed.
Well,
to
it sounds like
but
the
it'd be
at-large
tough.
though goes to the Fiesta, and Notre Dame would have to go to the Peach.
What at-large?
Bid.
Notre Dame's also an at-large.
Right, but they don't usually put two at-larges against each
Well,
other.
it wouldn't be the group of 5 winner this year goes to the Fiesta.
Right,
and then they'll play an at-large.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So like each year,
right,
one of the major bowls it gets the best group of 5 team. Cincinnati will be the highest ranked group of 5. They're in the Fiesta. That's why they're in the Fiesta.
Okay.
And then it would be at large. The reason that Notre Dame to the Fiesta is most likely not going to happen this year is because they try to avoid rematches.
Well, who gets the first at large selection?
What's that?
Who gets the first?
The committee does it. It's not that way anymore. The committee places now.
Okay.
It's the committee has a. I don't think the bowls have the say they used to have.
Okay.
I think it's now the committee places those
okay.
teams, which allows them to kind of finagle with the matchups a little bit.
Sure.
So
of course.
There's a chance the Peach matchup could be so bad that they're just like, look, that game's going to suck. Like it's Notre Dame,
right?
And Pitt is not going to sell anything. So. Let's just put Pitt against somebody we don't care about, and that game's just gone. This Cincinnati Notre Dame rematch is going to be a moneymaker for us.
It's going to be great,
as opposed to Cincinnati against some SEC team where half their roster is not going to play against, and then it's Notre Dame against Pitt or NC State or Wake Forest, a game no one's going to care about. Right. I still don't see it happening. I think it's going to be a situation where we're going to see Notre Dame in the Peach Bowl if they win out. Most likely.
I agree. That's what I was able to gather.
Assuming they don't make the playoff.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure it's clear. It's not a guarantee no rematches. It's just if there's no other option, if there's any other option, we'd prefer to not have a rematch.
Correct.
Is my understanding of.
We got a couple super chats.
We do.
Grab those. Toe Jam 1992. Howdy. Which coach of a team that is on the college football playoff bubble will win the annual "We Should Be In" whining Olympics this year? Jimbo, well, he says Jumbo won it last year. Well, it'll probably be Cincinnati, but I don't think Luke Fickell's going to whine about it. Maybe he does, but.
And I think honestly, I would appreciate his whining a little bit more. Because if his team finishes undefeated, he's like,
what else can we do?
We did what you told us to do. We went and played a top 10 team and went to their place and beat them by 11 in a game where we dominated for 4 quarters. And they did.
And they did. Day. That's a fact.
We scheduled another Big Ten team that was a preseason top 25. We went to their place and dominated them, right?
Yep.
Now, they didn't. Right.
They didn't dominate them, but yeah.
But the scoreboard's going to look like it.
Right.
That's what he says. And then, hey, we can't control what's going on. We can't control the UCF's down. We can't control. We did what you asked us to do, and we won every game. I would be more sympathetic. Now, I wouldn't agree with his take, depending on what happens, because look, I feel bad for you, but we can't give you points because you tried to schedule hard. We have to evaluate you on what your schedule actually was.
Correct.
Because based on what your schedule actually was, it's not a given that you would have been undefeated.
Right.
If UCF and SMU and Houston or Memphis and Indiana and all these teams were what they were supposed to be, you may not be undefeated right now. And so that's kind of where I kind of come down to it. In my.
Do you have another candidate for the for this trophy?
Dave Clawson, if their team goes 12-1 and wins the ACC.
Yeah.
Because Dave Clawson's a really good football coach, but he can tend to get a little bit whiny at times.
That's fair. That's fair.
I'm trying to think. If there's a second Big Ten team, well, it's not possible. There can't be, because of what Purdue did this weekend. There can't be a second Big Ten team with one loss, so that's not an option. I'll tell you another coach that may get it. If Oregon somehow is sitting outside the top 5. Because here's the thing, I don't think Oklahoma, if they continue to run the tables out, I don't care where they started from. If the Big 12 champ goes 13-0, they're going to be.
I agree. They're in. I agree, especially this year.
Right.
Specifically this year.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're going to get at least 2 more. And the best thing that happened to them this weekend was Iowa State beating Texas, because they still have to play Iowa State. And that game is now, because see, Baylor's still going to be ranked, right?
Right.
It's just they're not going to be ranked as high.
They'll be like
and
22,
Oklahoma's getting ready to play
that.
them.
Right.
Right. So there's a good chance that the 3 teams that Oklahoma has to play moving forward, because they only have 3 games left, obviously, that a bye this weekend. There's a good chance that all 3 teams that they play are going to be ranked this weekend. Baylor, they play at Baylor this weekend. Home against Iowa State, who just beat Texas convincingly. They're now 6-3. So there's a chance that Iowa State's in there, and then they play at Oklahoma State. And then they're probably going to have a rematch against one of those 3 teams.
Right.
In the Big 12 championship.
I think Oklahoma moves up this week on a bye.
They'll move up a couple spots.
Yeah.
I think they'll move ahead of Michigan State, and they'll move ahead of Wake Forest, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, I agree with that. So, yes, Iowa State winning was big for them. Now Iowa State's got to go beat Texas Tech this weekend, right? But if Iowa State's 7-3 going into their matchup against Oklahoma, they'll be in the top 25.
Yeah.
If you're Oklahoma, you're crossing your fingers that Iowa State's in this week for the same reason we talked about Cincinnati last week.
Yes, exactly.
Is if they're 23rd this week and they beat Texas Tech on the road, some teams are going to lose. They're going to then jump up to 19. Then when Oklahoma smacks them, they may drop down like 24.
Right.
And then stay, because then if you look at Iowa State, last game of the year, we'll get it right here. They play TCU at home. So as long as they handle business against Texas Tech, and hopefully if they're in this week and handle business against Texas Tech and then beat TCU the week after they play Oklahoma, there's a good chance that Iowa State's going to finish in the top 25 at 8-4. 8-4 is going to get you in the top 25 this year.
Right.
It just is.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
There's 5-3 teams in the top 20 last week.
Ridiculous.
Right.
Whatever.
So that's going to be
now
the
they're
case.
5-4 and they'll be out. But
yes, Oklahoma's going to be in. So then it could come down to, okay, so we've already said they're setting it up for Bama. If Bama runs the table, they're in. Georgia's in if they run the table until they lose to Bama. Oklahoma wins if they win out. Now it gets into whoever. If Oregon and Ohio State both win out, whichever team doesn't make it is going to be whining big time.
Sure.
And so it could be Ryan Day. It could be Ryan Day that gets that award.
We got another super chat that goes along with this thought process from Will. Thank you, Will. He says, would Notre Dame make the playoff if Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Bama all lose another game?
I think it'd almost be a certainty if Notre Dame wins out, if they all 3 lose a game. I think
Ohio State with 2 losses is out.
Right. Oklahoma with a loss, yes. And I think Oklahoma with a loss drops behind Notre Dame because they're only 2 spots ahead of Notre Dame now.
Because their strength of schedule is not going to be as good. Yeah.
And then Bama's out with 2 losses. They'd be behind Notre Dame.
So unless the only way I see Bama still being in is if it's a close loss to Georgia. I think they could both get in.
I still don't think they're in over Notre Dame though. Like they could be 4, but I don't see an 11-2 Bama making it over like if it comes down to where, let's say Georgia wins out, right?
So Georgia's undefeated. They got a close win against Alabama.
Oklahoma's undefeated. They're in. After that, it's kind of like
Oregon.
Oregon.
Loss.
I mean, I feel like if it came down to the 4 spot, right? I don't think Bama with 2 losses would make it in over Notre Dame.
Okay.
In my opinion. I just don't.
That'd be a fun debate.
Now, if all those things happen, so let's say to make this interesting, let's say Bama wins out and Georgia loses only to Bama in a close game. So let's just get down to that worst case scenario of every non-SEC fan, which is that they both get in, right? So, because your premise is that Bama loses. So Bama loses, and let's just say it's 2 Georgia in the title game.
Right.
So Georgia's in.
It's close.
Right?
3-point game.
If Ohio State loses and Oklahoma loses, that drops them both down. So then you've got, he didn't say Oregon, so we'll say Oregon wins out. So they're in. And let's say Cincinnati wins out. They're in. Now we get down to Notre Dame.
And whoever the Big Ten champ is.
Michigan State and Michigan. So that's kind of where it comes down to it is I feel like that's why where this week's rankings are important. Because if Notre Dame's ahead of Michigan, it'll be easier for them to stay ahead of Michigan, even if Michigan beats Ohio State. But if Michigan's ahead of them and then beats Ohio State, they have no chance. Now, if Ohio State loses to Michigan State and beats Ohio State, then I feel like Notre Dame will have a better resume than Michigan State. But again, it comes down to if Michigan State or Michigan both have one loss and a win over Ohio State, I think they would both have a better resume at that time than Notre Dame. Because if I had Michigan's resume better last week, it ain't that far away to where a win over Ohio State certainly jumps that sucker up quite a bit.
Sure.
So I think what would have to happen is they would need Michigan State to beat Ohio State or Purdue to beat Ohio State. Because here's the best case scenario for Notre Dame.
Purdue beats Ohio State.
If Purdue beats Ohio State, but then Ohio State beats Michigan State and Michigan, Notre Dame's in.
Yes.
I mean, based under
Sure.
Will's question.
You got to be a huge Purdue fan this week.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
Like y'all need to be cheering for Jeff Brom now the way that I've been for the last 4 years.
The way I was cheering for him this past weekend.
Yeah, no doubt. So it would have to be a lot of chaos for Notre Dame to get in. Look, this weekend helped Notre Dame a lot.
Yeah, it did.
I could see a scenario where Notre Dame only jumps up to 8. I could see a scenario, Vince, where they only jump up to 9. I mean, I could
put Michigan and Michigan State ahead of them.
Michigan and Michigan State still being ahead of them. I wouldn't do that, but I could see it.
Right.
Part of it is because I don't think the committee wants Cincinnati in. And so the further you have Notre Dame down, even though it's splitting a little bit of hairs, it's still helping you have Ohio State ahead of Cincinnati. And I think ultimately that's where a lot of that jockeying is coming right now. Now, you got to hope. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, and again, did you checked out my cheering guide on Friday, right, Vince? You know, you finally did now after the fact.
Gave you some traffic.
I pretty much nailed like the games that need to happen. They all, not that I nailed it, but like the
what Notre Dame fans
universe
nailed
happen. What Notre Dame had to happen. It's not like I predicted it. I didn't predict either one of those games to go the way that they did, but we'll have more this weekend because there's a lot of games this weekend too, and we'll get more into that once the top 25 comes out. But it'll be the same principle as Notre Dame's going to have to do a lot of scoreboard watching, and this is what comes down to that day against Cincinnati. Brian Kelly not having his team ready to play that day because that is. I've been saying it all year. I'll say it all year, but here's the reality: Cincinnati's not that good. Notre Dame played like garbage. And still had a chance in the fourth quarter to take a lead and didn't do what they need to do. Props to Cincinnati because they came to play that day. Cincinnati played hard. They were afraid of Notre Dame, and they handled Notre Dame that day. And that's why they're ahead of Notre Dame right now.
Yeah.
And so they're ranked higher than Notre Dame, but they're not a better team than Notre Dame, in my opinion. Notre Dame
I agree.
Didn't show up that day. But there's going to be a lot of scoreboard watching because Notre Dame does not control their own destiny. And that's why a lot of the questions are, well, who has to lose for Notre Dame to get up? Notre Dame handles their business. They're a 2 seed. I mean, let's be honest. If Notre Dame beat Cincinnati, they'd be the 2 seed right now. Not Bama. Notre Dame would be.
I agree.
So that's what frustrates me. You lost to freaking Cincinnati, but it is what it is. So there's still a pathway, but a lot would have to happen, Vince, in my opinion.
A few more super chats, my friend. Mike says, love the show. Been a while. The freshmen have been great. Your thoughts? I think the freshmen have done more than I anticipated because I didn't think that they'd get on the field.
Right.
But they've been forced onto the field due to circumstances that
lo and behold, they've all played well.
Exactly. And I agree, Mike. They all have played well, and it's great to see them on the field.
Right. I don't think any of them have played great.
Well,
I think the reason maybe that people are saying great is because of how little we've seen freshmen play for the most part. The one positive is this is now the second year in a row we've seen a bunch of freshmen play. Last year was Chris Tyree. Well, not a lot. Collectively
Mayer,
between
Chris
the two
Tyree.
last year. Last year you had Chris Tyree and Michael Mayer. This year you've got Tyler Buckner, Logan Diggs, Lorenzo Stiles, Deion Colsey. Blake Fisher, won a starting job before he got hurt. Joe Alt has now won that job. There's been a lot of freshmen on offense forced onto the field, and they've played very well. Deion Colsey had a great catch. I mean,
he did.
Not great catch, great play. Right?
Yeah, no, it was huge.
It was a great ball, and he made the catch.
Yeah.
He looked more comfortable.
It was one that he dropped in the past.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Or other receivers would have dropped. So it's good to see them playing. Yeah. I wish Kane Barong hadn't gotten hurt because I think he'd be playing a lot right now, too.
I agree.
Had he not got hurt. Maybe we'll see Audric Estime coming up soon. But no, it's been good to see those freshmen get their opportunity and shine. And that's exactly what they've done. They've played well.
No doubt.
And I'd like to see them get more opportunities, and they're going to have to now. If Avery Davis's injuries is what we think it is, Lorenzo Styles may be starting now. And I'm going to have an article about that in the next couple of days about what should Notre Dame do with, now that if Avery Davis is out, what should Notre Dame do? And I've got a lot of different – there's not just one answer. I've got a lot of different things that they need to do. And it's not just there's only one thing to do. Here's several things they need to do, including 21 and 21 personnel needs to become your best friend. 100%. If you're not basing your offense out of 21 personnel, first and foremost, now 11 can still be a part of it because Dion can play and Lorenzo can play. But that would be the first thing that I'm focusing on is 21 personnel. It's about getting your best 11 on the field.
Right.
And you can't tell me that there's not a scenario in which Chris Tyree isn't one of your best 11 if he's healthy. And Logan Diggs has shown when you get that kid the rock, he's going to do something with it.
Sure, absolutely.
Yep.
Josh Phillips, thanks for the super chat. Josh, do you think the committee will rank Oklahoma 5 or 6?
Let me go back to the rankings because I did not look at their rankings.
I think they could
for this show
up. It just depends on how they view Michigan and Michigan State.
Yeah.
That's my big issue.
I think that they'll jump Michigan because Michigan's loss no longer looks as good.
Correct.
I think there's a chance they could jump Michigan State. I think the highest that Oklahoma could get would be 6. Now, if the committee really wants to not like Cincinnati, they could look and say, look, Cincinnati's now had 3 ugly games in a row against bad teams, which is true. If they want to use that justification and listen, the president was doing some serious spinning last week. It's like he was hanging out with like the presidential campaigns in 2020, the way that guy was spinning stuff, right? Like it was just, I mean, he was tap dancing around a lot of different things. They have played in the last 3 weeks. They struggled against Navy, who's 2-7. They struggled against Tulane, who's 1-8. And they struggled against Tulsa, who's 3. I mean, Tulsa outplayed them in the second half of that game.
Yeah.
And they're 3-6. They can look at Oklahoma and say, yeah, okay, Oklahoma hasn't been playing great, but they're certainly playing better than Cincinnati. And I think they have been. I would have, I mean, look, does Oklahoma have a win as good as Cincinnati's over Notre Dame? No. But again, it's about the totality of the resume. And, you say, okay, well, Oklahoma didn't play great against Tulane either. Fair point. And I think that's why Oklahoma was 8th last week. But I also think that was week 2. And that was a weird circumstance about the hurricane and all that kind of stuff. Oklahoma recently has been playing better. They're also coming off of a 31-point win over Texas Tech. 2 weeks before that, they had a 21-point win over TCU. Yeah, they struggled against Kansas, legit. But Kansas is a Power 5 team. Tulsa, Navy, and Tulane are Group of 5 teams. It's just going to be looked at differently. So I think there's a chance they could jump. I think they'll jump up to 6. I think the only exception would be is if the committee is like, we need Ohio State in, then they're going to have Michigan State higher. Yeah, because they want to set Cincinnati up or they want one of those 2 teams to be set up to make the playoff, either Ohio State or Michigan State. And if you keep them at 5 and 6, then or maybe even because Ohio State, what was Ohio State last week? 5? So Ohio State's going to be in the top 4 this week.
Yeah, they were just
right. So Georgia's going to be 1. Bama's going to stay 2. Oregon will move up to 3, and Ohio State will jump up to 4.
I think, yeah,
that's how I think it's going to look. Now the question is going to be: do they jump Oklahoma all the way up to 5, or do they drop Michigan State down to 5 or 6 to set up that Ohio State and Michigan State game to where if Michigan State beats Ohio State, then you can jump Michigan State right back into the top 4. That would be the entertaining part of that. So that's where a lot of that intrigue is going to come for me. Like 1 and 2, no brainer. I think 3 and 4 will be kind of, I think those are going to be obvious since 4 and 5 both won.
Right.
And 6 didn't really have an impressive victory. I mean, if Cincinnati would have blown out, Cincinnati, this is your own fault. If you'd have gone and blown out Tulsa like you should have at home, you've got a case. Hey,
Tulane,
Cincinnati.
didn't they play Tulane?
No, this week they played Tulsa.
They played Tulsa.
They played Tulane the week before. 2 weeks before that, or 2 weeks before
Tulane, Tulsa. Whatever.
Yes, I believe. Yeah, they
played. Both bad teams.
They played Navy, then Tulane, then Tulsa. They played Tulsa at home this week. Won 28-20. Got outplayed. If you win that game 52-24,
right,
52-20, like you should have,
moving on up.
Hey, look, you know what? Nebraska almost beat Ohio State. Oregon didn't look great against Washington. Alabama didn't look great. We blew them out. We had a couple rough games, but we're back on track. Look at us. But as you keep piling up these ugly victories over bad teams, and it's not going to get any easier this week for them to impress the committee, because this week they play South Florida. South Florida's 2-7. I don't even know if they blow South Florida out, if that matters.
Yeah.
And if they struggle to beat South Florida, they're dropping.
Yeah, and they should. They should. Yes, being undefeated is a thing. Don't get me wrong.
It matters, which is why they're even in the top 10.
But remember what happened to Central Florida when they were undefeated.
Yeah. And those Central Florida teams,
strength of schedule matters.
Smacking people. Now, here's what those Central Florida teams did not have. They did not have a win over Notre Dame, a team like Notre Dame. But those Central Florida teams that were undefeated were destroying people. I think 2018 was the last time. They played 56-7, 38-0, 56-36, 45-14, 48-20, 31-30 at Memphis. Right, that Memphis team that year finished 8-6. Actually, lost to Wake Forest. They were actually ranked pretty high. They lost to UCF, Missouri. That's not the Memphis team I was thinking of. This is the 2019 team that played Penn State. Beat Memphis by 1, 37-10, 52-20, 35-24, 38-13 over a ranked Cincinnati team, 38-10, 56-41. They were undefeated, but they had a double-digit victory over all but one team on their schedule. Cincinnati's not doing that, and that's the thing that's hurting Cincinnati, in my opinion.
All right, I want to answer this real quick because if you don't know the answer to this, then you're lost to what we're talking about. Brian says, is the committee an algorithm or people, and who determines who is on the committee? So it's people. The algorithm went away with the BCS. And so it is a group of people. And I don't know what the criteria is to get on the committee and who decides who's on the committee. Do you know the answer to that, Brian?
I don't. I'm looking it up now.
It's people with a college football background, some of them.
To a degree. I mean, they had Condoleezza Rice on there a couple years ago, right?
Right.
You have to be connected to the colleges some way, somehow.
Correct.
Because Condoleezza Rice was an administrator at Stanford at one point in time. Recently.
Correct. And an avid sports fan, goes to all kinds of sporting events, ND grad. But then she's also, but they have athletic directors. They have some presidents on there too. Yes.
So this is Wikipedia.
Okay. Take it for what it is.
Take it for what it is. Young people, Wikipedia is not the first research tool you should use. Vince, this is a public service announcement for fellow teachers like you.
Yeah.
The goal was for the panel to consist proportionally of current Power 5 athletic directors, former coaches, and a third group of voters, excluding current conference commissioners, coaches, and media members. So that would, during the selection process, organizers said they wanted the committee to be geographically balanced. Conference commissioners submitting lists. Oh, here we go. Okay, so conference commissioners submitted lists totaling more than 100 names from which to select the final committee members.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right. So I just want to get that one out there. We do have a bunch of super chats we got to roll through here. Jim says we got a couple pro Cincinnati chats here. If I'm not mistaken, it's not just that Notre Dame lost to Cincinnati; it's that they lost at home. If Cincinnati wins out, this quote, not that good team quote, will still be ahead of Notre Dame. Disagree.
They very well could.
But they could be, but I don't think they will be.
But that's not what he said. He didn't say necessarily should. He said they will. And they could. They certainly could. I think, Jim, here's the problem that I think a lot of people still have with this. And I think this is something the committees has always had to kind of juggle. That really tough line is head-to-head should matter. It should. I am not someone who says head-to-head should matter because, hey, right now I have Cincinnati ranked ahead of Notre Dame. There's only one reason why. One reason why.
Because they beat them.
Because they beat Notre Dame. And again, as we've said on this show many times, it wasn't just that they beat Notre Dame. They outplayed Notre Dame for, I don't say 4 quarters, Notre Dame outplayed them, I thought, like kind of in the late third, early fourth quarter when they climbed back into the game. It was a very small window. So let's say 3 out of 4 quarters, Cincinnati was clearly the better team, and they were a better team when it mattered late in the game.
Correct.
Right? But when you're determining your playoff team, it's not who had the best single day of the season, who had the best win. It's got to be about what's the entirety of your resume. And right now, we don't know what either team's entire resume is going to look like. Today, Cincinnati's resume justifies them being ahead of Notre Dame. For me, it's not by much. And if Cincinnati goes out and gets on track and blows out South Florida, blows out SMU, blows out Houston in the Atlantic 10 title game, and then who do they play the last weekend of the regular season? Give me a second. ECU. Okay. So if they blow out South Florida, blow out SMU, which would be a decent win. ECU right now is 5-4. They need to be rooting for ECU to win these next 2 games. And then they blow out Houston, or at least blow out 3 of those 4. Let's be fair. Then I would probably advocate for Cincinnati to be ahead of Notre Dame because they would start playing better.
But if they continue to play how they're playing now,
right? There's no way that right now that Notre Dame plays Cincinnati that they win. And the reason that matters is it's not because us as Notre Dame fans think it should matter. It's because that's what the committee has said.
Correct.
The committee has – so, like, if Oregon's playing like crap in November, they're not going to care that Oregon beat Ohio State on September 11th. If Ohio State goes out there and just smacks the rest of their opponents – and Oregon scuffles and they're beating these Utah by a field goal and Arizona State by 7 and these teams are Oregon State by 9 and Ohio State just blasts Michigan and blasts Michigan State. They're both sitting there with identical 12-1 records. Ohio State will and should get in because how you're playing going in does matter.
Sure.
Because it's about picking the 4 best teams. It's not just, well, this team beat that team on this particular day. Right? It's got to be about the entirety of the resume. Right now, Cincinnati's resume is better than Notre Dame's.
Right. We both have them ahead of Notre Dame.
Exactly. If Notre Dame barely goes out and beats Virginia and doesn't play great against Georgia Tech and barely beats Stanford, then you know what? We'll be sitting here saying Notre Dame doesn't deserve to be ahead of Cincinnati.
Absolutely. I'll be the first one to say it.
Right. Because we still have Cincinnati ahead of Notre Dame, but you also can't put your head in the sand and say, well, just because they're undefeated, they're going to get in. Because we have, how many years has the committee been doing this? And we've seen them twice put undefeated non-Power 5 teams out of the top 4.
Right.
And including a team in UCF who was I would argue, a better team than what Cincinnati is. So that's why I say, but could it happen? Absolutely could happen.
Hunter, thanks for the super chat. Hunter, Cincinnati winning and staying undefeated is helping Notre Dame with its own ranking, though. Legitimately do not understand all the hate for Cincinnati.
I'm sorry, Hunter. I can't stand comments like this. We're adults here, right? Unless you're a 13-year-old, which I don't think that you are, right? We're not children, okay? We're a sports channel talking sports. It has nothing to do with hate. That's a petty response. It's about of all the things I've said tonight, is anything in there just going, oh, I hate Cincinnati. They suck and they're not a Power 5 team. They shouldn't be.
Hate.
Then you could say, oh, you're just hating on Cincinnati because I'd be an ignorant fool that doesn't know it. I'm giving you data. I'm making my case. If you don't agree with my case, you know what I love about this country? As far as it stands right now, you're still allowed to have differing opinions of things, especially about these type of things.
Right.
And if you don't agree with me, Hunter, then make your case and we'll put it up. We'll respect it. But to say, I don't understand the hate for Cincinnati, shaking my head. Okay, what about our argument to you do you have a problem with? What about the argument that I've made about Cincinnati's overall resume, the fact that they haven't played a tough schedule, the fact that they've played not well these last 3 weeks, do you disagree with? Okay, because if your argument is, well, they still beat Notre Dame. So you're saying we should rank Cincinnati ahead of Notre Dame? We did.
I have them 2 spots above Notre Dame right now. So
I mean, if you want to come at us with a response, Hunter, I would love it. That's why we do this. And that's why we pull chats up, and there's people that won't put chats up because they don't want to be challenged. If you have a challenge for us and you want to make a case, make a case. But don't give me this junior high Twitter stuff of I don't get all the hate. Criticism or saying a team isn't that good is not hate when it's backed up with a legitimate argument that uses data that the committee has used since 2014. If you don't agree with it, state your case. Don't come at me with this whole hate stuff because that's a ridiculous argument, and that's for other channels, not ours, because we're stating a case. Now, could I be wrong? Of course. But if you want to prove me wrong, do it with a legitimate argument that counters my argument, because I didn't just say, I hate Cincinnati. They suck. They're not good. Not once have you ever heard us say they got lucky against Notre Dame. Never heard us say that because they didn't get lucky. They outplayed Notre Dame. We've said that since the day that they outplayed Notre Dame. And that's why, I'll repeat again, we have Cincinnati ranked ahead of Notre Dame.
This next one will make you laugh. So here we go. John Nessler. Hey, guys, sorry about my husband. He's cheap. You guys deserve a real super chat. I enjoy listening every night. No waterboarding here. LOL. Comment. Go Irish.
Mrs. Nessler, that made my night. And that was the perfect one to follow up with that last comment. That was so good.
I told you.
No waterboarding here.
Well, I'm glad to know that we're not breaking the Geneva Convention at your house. That's very important.
That we didn't beat you into submission about Notre Dame over Alabama. That is good to know. I appreciate that, Mrs. Nessler, very, very much. And thank you for joining the show. And yes, you know what? Your husband is cheap. He should have given us a bigger super chat the first time.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That made my night.
Tony with a super chat. It says, "Go Irish. Love you guys from Raleigh, North Carolina." So checking in from Raleigh.
Weather's a little nicer there than it. Well, at least temperatures wise. Well, it was a beautiful weekend.
Today was pretty gorgeous.
Yeah,
man.
It was really nice.
All day outside.
It was at least warmer in Raleigh this time of the year.
Most likely.
I used to spend time in Raleigh a little bit. My freshman year of college, I was at Methodist College in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We called it Fayetteville. That's anyone that's lived there knows what that means. Let's just say there wasn't a lot to do in Fayetteville unless you wanted to always be around like the Fort Bragg guys and the golf team at Methodist. So we would all go into Raleigh a lot. And there was a club there called Mars that had it was one of those big clubs, Vince, that has like different rooms with like different types of music. So we'd go do those things and kind of have fun. We had one weekend where we put on like khaki pants and like button up like polos.
Oh yeah,
and like tucked them in real tight. Oh yeah, no. We did like super preppy nerdy. Yeah. And so then we'd go into like each room. Like there's the headbanging room, there's the country room, and we would just start doing like the stupid dances. Like my buddy could do the Carlton really good. So like, we go into the hip hop room and he's doing that. And I'm doing like the sprinkler. I'm pulling out the lawnmower. Just that's how boring it was my freshman year of college at Methodist College.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. The disco room was kind of funny because then they all kind of were like, yeah, that's a disco move. And they all started doing the stuff. It was kind of ridiculous. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I wanted to throw that one up for you. Drunk Vigo.
Pretty much.
He enjoyed it.
And again, it's not even that I'm right or wrong with my feeling of Cincinnati. I could very well be wrong.
Right.
It's just make a grown-up argument why I am wrong because like it or not, look, there's not a team on this planet that I hate more than Michigan. Not a team on this planet. But last week, I was advocating for a one-loss Michigan team who had just lost to Michigan State being ranked ahead of Notre Dame.
Right.
So you can disagree with me, and I could be wrong. The committee disagreed with me big time last week because I had Oklahoma number 2. But make your case, right? And Hunter, I'll welcome that. I would enjoy that. But don't come on me with that stuff. Brian, thank you for your super chat. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. And then Andrew Rhodes, he goes, "I'm making Boilermaker chili right now. If that lets you know who I'm rooting for this weekend." It does let us know, and I'm right with
that. And we'll talk more about this on Tuesday. But honestly, Notre Dame fans should be rooting for Purdue this weekend as much, if not more, than they're rooting for Notre Dame this weekend.
Right.
Because Purdue beating Ohio State on the road this weekend would be monumental for Notre Dame. So, yes, I appreciate that. And I'm curious what Boilermaker chili is. to be honest with you.
Probably hot.
Do you know what that
would
is?
Be my guess, but I don't know.
I've never heard of that before.
I don't know. So, yeah, I'm being inundated by I'm being attacked by children in here.
Okay.
They're literally everywhere. Awesome.
Are they like army crawling around underneath?
They are.
For a second there, I thought Jeff Brom jumped into the chat.
Oh,
because I was scrolling real fast and I saw this.
Too bad he didn't. That'd have been great.
But since I saw it, I'll say, speaking of freshmen, with the very remote chance of Notre Dame getting the playoff, is there a legit argument for letting Buckner take the reins now and get great experience for next year? No. Because if you think Notre Dame has a chance to make the playoff, Jack Cohn
they have a chance for making the playoff because of what they've been doing.
Right. And because Jack Cohn's been your primary quarterback. I mean, again, I will remind you all again to go look at what Virginia Tech did in the third and fourth quarter after they had just a halftime, not even a week to prepare, just a 15-minute halftime. And they were able to completely shut him down to where he threw more passes to them than he did to Notre Dame receivers. Tyler Buckner is a phenomenal talent. He's going to be a great player.
Good. Yes.
But he is good when you don't know what's coming or he's got a very limited role. Jack Cohn went 23 of 29 this past weekend.
Yes,
okay. Was he great? No. Are there plenty of things I'd have coached him up on if I was his quarterback's coach?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there were some missed opportunities. But Jack Cohn has played 3 pretty good games in a row.
Right.
And the offense is working well now with him as the starting quarterback and Tyler Buckner as the change of pace. If your goal now, Jeff, if you were to say, let's just say Notre Dame were to lose to Virginia this weekend, just hypothetically, I'm not a big fan of the whole, well, just get ready for next year, because I think that's a little unfair to the guys on your team that are trying to play for the NFL. But if that were to happen, I would strongly consider about making that change, assuming Jack's the reason that they lost.
Sure.
Let's say they go on the road this weekend and Jack throws a couple picks and doesn't play well and Cincinnati beats Notre Dame. Then we can have this conversation.
Virginia.
Right? Virginia. What did I say, Virginia Tech?
You said Cincinnati.
Oh, I'm still mad about that.
Don't worry. Hunter has come back with something.
That would be the thing for me that I would look at and say, I would look at and say, then we could talk about it. But as long as they keep winning with Jack Cohn as the starting quarterback, I see in their offense, even though it didn't play great this past weekend, still better than what it was for most of the year prior to the last 3 weeks. I think their offense is starting to find a niche or it's starting to click with a balanced attack. And if you take out Jack Cohn, you lose that balance.
Right.
Because we saw against Virginia Tech that Tyler Buckner, once a team knows he's in there to stay, can make their name very one-dimensional.
Well,
that's not where you want to be.
Here's a prime example from just yesterday, right? They brought Tyler Buckner in on a 3rd and 4 at the first play of the fourth quarter. 3rd and 4, they bring in Tyler Buckner to try to get it. What does Navy do? All-out blitz. What happens? Notre Dame loses yards. Like that's all they did, and it was one-on-one everywhere else. I'm pretty sure there would have been some open guys if they would have ran some routes, okay? Mm-hmm. But they were running the ball, and everybody in the stadium knew that they were running the ball, so they brought everybody, and it didn't work, okay? And Tyler Buckner did not have either the ability or the permission to change the play because everybody knew that they were bringing everybody.
Right.
Okay? So that's a problem for me, right? And so they either don't trust him to make a decision like that or it's not built in.
Right.
So that's an issue.
Again, this isn't hating on Tyler Buckner.
No, that's
right.
This
is Tyler Buckner played 1 year of high school football in the last 3 years. I think he's going to be great.
Yeah.
I mean, I had Tyler Buckner as the number 2 player in his class behind Blake Fisher, who I had as I had him as a top 50 recruit. I think Tyler Buckner is going to be a tremendous player. But just because he's doing well in this niche doesn't mean he's going to do better with a full-time role, because we've seen him have a full-time role once, and he went 1 of 6 with 2 interceptions in the 3rd and 4th quarter until he got hurt and got yanked. And then Jack Cohn came off the bench and led Notre Dame to 2 straight scoring drives in the win, which I honestly don't think happens if Tyler Buckner plays that 4th quarter.
Right.
Now, I don't know if Notre Dame would have got back in the game if Tyler didn't come in, right? I mean, Tyler led him to 2 touchdown drives.
No,
he gave him a spark.
Yes.
And that's exactly what he should be, a spark.
Yes. No
But
question.
as we saw in that game, the longer he stays in, the longer they can adjust their game plan to defending him, not a Jack Cohn-led offense, the less effective he'll be.
He has been superb in his role.
And he's going to eventually be an every down quarterback. I would argue as early as
22.
Next season.
Yeah.
Maybe by the end of the season, but he's just not there yet.
Correct. Hunter is back. And
I gave him with a big super chat, so big ups on that one.
I respect him for number one. I would have pulled up Hunter's comment regardless of whether he gave a super chat or not. Okay, because Brian,
he's like, "Dang it, seriously? Crap."
He's got another one after this too. But big ups to Hunter. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate this. He wanted to man up here, and that's awesome. He goes, so you said Notre Dame was Cincy's Super Bowl. That is the case for Cincinnati every game since Notre Dame. Now, I agree, Cincy has not played well the past 3 games, but playing teams with nothing to lose is tough on anyone. I apologize. I want to answer the last part there. Yes. Notre Dame has played everybody with nothing to lose as well, so they're in the same boat.
Sure.
As far as that.
And to his point, we saw that this
Notre
weekend
plays.
with Ohio State against Nebraska and Alabama against LSU. And I mean,
welcome to the big club.
But again, LSU is not Navy. LSU is not Tulane. LSU is not Tulsa. The fact of the matter is yes, what you're saying about Cincinnati is true. It's Cincinnati's like, okay, you could say, okay, well, they're everybody else's Super Bowl this year. Well, I mean, okay, not really, but they're a good team. They're the best team in their division, in their league right now.
Yeah,
and that's a big game, and these teams have nothing to lose. No question about that. But here's the deal for me, Hunter, is that Cincinnati, the talent gap between Cincinnati and those teams is pretty big. And if one of those games would have happened, here's the big thing for me, and this is the point I'm making. If one of those games would have happened, I have no problem with it. Notre Dame's had games like that. Toledo was like that, right? Florida State was like that. Now, again, those games are earlier in the year, and I think as season goes on, I think you have to look at that.
Sure.
It's not that they barely beat Tulsa or struggled to beat Tulsa or, Navy played them a lot tougher than they should have, or they didn't look good against Tulane. Individually, none of those games are a huge deal to me. But collectively, it's a problem.
And the fact that it's 3 in a row,
right?
Like it's a problem, and it's not even that it's 3 games in the season. It's
if you dispersed them, right, then it would be different. And you can not agree with that or not like it, but that's how the committee looks at these things,
right?
And that's hurt Notre Dame before. In 2015, Notre Dame was the number 4 team in the college football playoff. They played a bad Wake Forest team, and they beat them 28-7, but it was ugly. The next week, they went to Boston in Fenway, played a really bad BC team, and they beat them like 19-16. It was an ugly game. BC stunk. Notre Dame played bad 2 weeks in a row, and you know what the committee did? They dropped them out of the top 4.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then Notre Dame knocked themselves out the final game by losing to Stanford. But the fact is Notre Dame kept winning against Power 5 teams and got knocked out of the top 4. Why? Because they were not playing inferior teams the way a playoff team is supposed to play inferior teams.
Correct.
Right? So this is not just hate for Cincinnati. This is looking at this. How has the committee done this in the past? That's why I'm always banging on ESPN, because they're always making these stupid arguments that are like your emotional arguments, not like with any concept of what the committee has done for 7 years now. Right? And it's like, it was kind of funny when like they were advocating BYU should be ranked high. And I'm thinking, do you guys not pay attention to anything that's gone on the last 5-6 years? There's no way BYU is going to be in the top 10. They haven't beat anybody. And then lo and behold, BYU is like 15th. And no, they're like 15th in the first poll. And ESPN's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, anyone with a brain that's paid attention to the committee the last 5-6 years knew that BYU wasn't going to be in the top 10, except for the people that are paid to give their opinions on ESPN.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so that's where we're coming from, Hunter, is you may not like it, you may not agree with it, and you can make all the reasons for it that you want, but the reality is they've had 3 games in a row against not just not great teams, bad teams. UC Davis played better against Tulsa than Cincinnati did. I mean, that's a reality. These are bad teams.
Yeah.
I want to get to his next point too, because I want to respond to this too.
As much as the playoff matters, I will not let it ruin the experience. The best season Cincy has had so far since 2009 did not mean for the argument to come out childish. And then he says, wish you all the best.
Go back to that last part. You shouldn't. Nothing we said is a case to say Cincinnati sucks. It's that they're not a playoff team.
Right. Enjoy the
season.
Saying
Cincinnati's not a playoff team is not saying it's a bad year. I mean, it's a show about the playoff. If we were doing a show on what kind of job has Luke Fickell done at Cincinnati? It'd be a fun, positive show because he has done a great job at Cincinnati. The fact that Cincinnati's even in this conversation should make every Cincinnati fan super pumped. Now, a lot of Cincinnati fans, and I'm not talking about Hunter, just go to that cesspool that is Twitter. They're like, I mean, I put a thing out about Cincinnati's not that good, and all the Cincinnati losers just kind of came out of the woodwork. I appreciate the fact that Hunter came back at us and then made an argument. I
much
appreciate
respect
that
for Hunter, absolutely.
But the reality is, it shouldn't ruin the season, Hunter. You should be loving this season because a lesser team would have lost to Tulsa. A lesser team would have lost to Navy. Lesser team would have gone to Notre Dame, been completely overwhelmed by the environment, being on national TV, playing a top 10 team that's been in the playoffs the last series, and they would have folded and lost to Notre Dame. Since they didn't do any of those things, you can enjoy the heck out of this season. You should. And if they go undefeated, to be honest with you, it might actually be better for you to enjoy the season if they don't make the playoff. Because then they're going to go play in some New Year's Six Bowl against some team who's not going to be as good as Bama or Oklahoma or a rematch against Notre Dame or Georgia, and you're going to have a better chance to win as opposed to going to the playoff and getting beat. So you should be enjoying the season. You should be enjoying the heck out of the season. It is absolutely the best season they've had since 2009. But it doesn't make them a playoff team.
Right.
Just like UCF had the best season in school history in 2018, and it didn't make them a playoff team. And that's the whole point.
Yep.
But I appreciate you coming to the channel
and
responding back, and I appreciate the super chats.
No doubt.
Very much.
Absolutely. You know what? Big ups to Hunter. I appreciate that. Okay. Is there anything else you want to add to the conversation?
See if are there any more good
it's just more
any more good questions?
Talk. There's talk that Notre Dame shouldn't play Navy.
That's a conversation we are not going to entertain in this chat and on this show because I believe you're on the same page as I am, Vince.
Goodness. Yes.
That is a series that should never go away as much as and look, I think y'all have picked up on something. I might have said this before, Vince. I freaking hate the triple option. But I still am not playing Navy because my respect for just the Naval Academy,
all of it,
and why this series is played is much greater than the fact that it's much greater than my respect and love is still much greater than my disdain for the triple option.
No, that's fair.
And I think rules changes. I think the changes in the rules the last couple years is also we're seeing less and less Notre Dame injuries and triple option injuries because they've gotten rid of a lot. There's certain things you can't do now with cut blocking from behind that you could do 5, 6, 7 years ago that I think is why you don't see that. And
because Notre Dame hasn't had an injury in the Navy game in quite some time, and you can't really count.
Like Jason Adams only got hurt last year, but I don't think it was like unique to Navy. It happened against Navy, but I don't think it was unique to Navy.
And Avery Davis had nothing to do with them playing Navy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's less and less of an issue moving forward. Brian Jones, I love this. There's a better chance Notre Dame joins a conference before they stop playing Navy. And that is accurate. If Notre Dame joins a conference, it will be, by the way, we're still playing Navy. Like that, no question about that, Brian. I completely agree with that comment. We got a super chat here from Mark. He says, I think we should try to play them to open the season. I hate playing them this late in the season. They are going to play them in 2 years, the first game of the season.
And I think they've done that a few times now.
Yeah.
Let me make this point, Mark, and I used to feel that way, and let me explain why I don't anymore. What I would say is I would try like crazy to schedule them with a bye week either before or after.
Mm-hmm.
Preferably before. The reason I would prefer it with a bye week as opposed to before the beginning of the season is you're going to have to spend 2 weeks of fall camp working on the option during a time. Because again, this is not what my answer would have been 2-3 years ago. I've really thought through this. You're going to have to spend 2 weeks about preparing for the triple option at a time when you're really building and developing your football team still. Now, if it's a year where you happen to have like 2012, where you happen to have veterans like Manti and Zeke Mata and Capron Lewis Moore, and I think Lewis Nix was his junior at that time, and Bennett Jackson was a veteran. Yet, Dan Fox was a veteran. Danny Spahn was a veteran. That year you could live with it because you had a lot of veterans. But what about those years where you've got a lot of newcomers? Yeah, it may help you beat Navy, but you just lost developmental time on building your defense that you can't get back.
Yeah.
Whereas if you play them in week 7 or 8 with a bye week before, you've now developed your team. You can just quickly shift gears, spend a couple extra days of, like, what I would do is I would use the extra. I mean, because what I've always advocated is the bye weeks don't necessarily help you like people think that they do. Like, you're not going to beat a team that you wouldn't have otherwise because you practice. But against the option, I think it would be beneficial because you got 2 extra days to just show them the look. Just show them the look. Do walkthroughs. Just do different things. Go over assignments. You're not putting really anything new in that like I think teams kind of go outside their comfort zone. You have a plan. You implement that plan. You play it, and then you move on the next week. So I think I've kind of come around and settled in on the whole. I'd like to be with a bye week before more than I would the beginning of the season, unless you can look forward and say in 2 years we probably are going to have a pretty veteran team. Maybe then you can make that case. But I think I've changed my tune on that, Mark, because I used to be right where you are. About opening the season on them, because it made sense. You get it over with and then you move on. But then as I kind of thought more and more about it, I'm not as in love with it. But I would rather be bye week. Here's my options: bye week, first game of the season. The third option would be, like it is now, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So now is my third option. It's just I think I'd go bye week ahead of beginning of the season.
Well, in 23, obviously, since they're going to be in Dublin, they'll have a bye week after, right? And then I believe
I don't believe so. I think they actually have a game the next week because it's one of those. Let me just. I thought I looked at this the other day, and I thought that they had a game after that.
What I'm looking at, they don't know.
Okay, yeah. Right now, it's an open week because they have 4 games that they haven't slotted yet.
Correct.
So they have an opening on. They actually have 2 openings before that. Right. So it'd be.
And they have 4 games that they haven't slotted.
Right.
So
and they still don't have anything for September 30th, October 7th, October 21st. They don't have anything for November 11th, November 18th. So there's a lot of open dates. So there's if they're able to do it, and they have to find. They have 4 games they have to slot, and they have 1 more opponent they still have to find.
When they went to Dublin last time at the beginning of the season, it was going to be a bye week afterwards because of the jet lag and all of that stuff. They usually put a bye week after that,
which they did not do in 2012.
Okay,
right. They were going to do it last year, I believe.
Correct.
I believe last year was supposed to be a bye week after Dublin, but in 2012 it was not.
Okay.
So because but to your point, they played them on September 1st.
Right.
As opposed to earlier in August, like this game is going to be.
26th or whatever.
So, you could be right on that, Vince. I just thought when I put the schedule down, when I wrote the schedule down the other day, I could have swore there was like a game in that first week of September, but you are correct.
But we shall see.
Yep.
We shall see, sir.
Yep.
I think we did have another super chat. Yes. Will says, why do we play Navy and not Army and Air Force? I'll let you take this one.
So
very simple.
So there was it was at the beginning of the NBC broadcast. They kind of addressed this. No, actually, or was it the article that Andrew wrote?
They addressed it in the broadcast as well.
Yeah, so it was.
So
basically, when Notre Dame had this idea of bringing an academy, because the military academies were kind of setting up on colleges, and they went to Army.
They needed space because of all the people being recruited and
trained, and they had to train officers. I mean, it's like some people were drafted and they were trained to go fight, and other people had to be trained to be officers, right? And the Naval Academy and West Point, they're not just training grunts, only they're training officers. That's part of the reason you go to the academy, not just enlist at 18 years old and just go to boot camp.
Right.
I believe I'm correct on that. And they went to Army, and Army said no. They offered it to Army as well. Navy's just the only one that said yes. And so that's part of it. Plus, when it comes to Air Force, I don't believe that the Air Force existed in early 19. I thought the Air Force officially started like as its own academy later, like 47 or 48. So I could be wrong on that, but I don't think it was like it is like it is now. I'd have to go back and look into that, but I don't believe.
If you have Peacock, you can go back and watch the game, and they have the entire broadcast. And the very beginning is that. So
Yeah.
it's about a 2-minute thing, and it is actually really good.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here on Air Force, but I don't. Here we go. Yeah, Air Force first football season was 1955, so there was no Air Force football team at the time, and I don't believe the Air Force Academy started until the late 40s, because
Okay.
the like if you think of World War II, right? The fighter pilots were either part of the Navy on carriers or they were part of the Army. So I don't believe there was an Air Force in that time. Again, if somebody knows the answer to that and you want to correct me, let me know. But I don't believe that is the case. So yes, yeah. Randall Norris says the Air Force was part of the Army at the time, right? So like
There you go.
it wasn't its own. It wasn't its
It wasn't
own
his
thing.
own entity.
Yeah, I don't think it was. Yeah, Brian Hayes, the Army Air Corps. Yeah, Sean O'Hara, 1947. So yes, I was correct. And then Craig says the Air Force Academy started in 1954. So see, I'm not an idiot. I do know what I'm talking about sometimes.
I'm not an idiot.
So yeah,
Confirmation.
that's why it was really Army Navy were the options, and that's kind of what happened. So
John A1's got a super chat. John, thank you very much. He
Yeah.
says, in case of Cincinnati, if Notre Dame keeps winning and stays in the top 10, winning ugly without a loss, half lost teams. Help me out here. They tried to schedule
it's greater
Power
than
5
1
teams.
to 2 lost teams.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. They tried to schedule Power 5 teams. Yes,
Sure.
they did try to schedule Power 5 teams. No question. And
Yeah.
they got a top 10 team in Notre Dame, and they beat
Right.
them. IU doesn't help you very much
No,
because they're not good this year.
no, they're terrible.
And the rest of your schedule is awful.
What's
I mean,
hurt them more is what's going on in the AAC right now.
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly.
if they had a win over a UCF team that was like a normal UCF team, that's a big win. That's a top 20 win, right? And that's what's hurt them more than anything is the fact that UCF is not good this year. So, but look, again, the thing where, John, I guess I kind of disagree is it's the same with Notre Dame. To me, you can't look at it and say, what did you do on your best day and your worst day? It's more about what did you do throughout the entire season. That's really what it all boils down to me.
Agreed.
So, and then Craig adds a little bit of context just for those who aren't familiar. He goes, Notre Dame was all male. It was an all male college back then, which is accurate. Most students went to the war. A lot of them did. Some of Notre Dame's Frank Leahy was like enlisted, right? Like coaches for Notre Dame enlisted, players enlisted, and some were drafted, right? I mean, that's the other part of it too. And there was no, hey, this guy's a Heisman Trophy candidate. He can't, he's,
right,
like you would now.
Right.
I mean, there's no way that they would there's no way they'd be able to draft. They'd get exceptions and all this kind of stuff. And it's just a different time,
ridiculous. Time.
Yeah. And we're a much bigger population now. It's just different time. But Navy needed the space for training officers for the war effort and use Notre Dame's campus and save Notre Dame from shutting down. That's a really small part of not small, really good quick synopsis. But we wrote an article at Irish Breakdown. Andrew McDonough wrote a really good article. But the Notre Dame's connection to the military goes all the way back to the 1800s in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And he talks about all of it. It was really, really well done. And so it wasn't just this.
Right.
So, yeah, but really good stuff. Really good stuff.
I'm loving this because it's all history. And Chad goes, came for playoff breakdown, stayed for Air Force history lesson.
Right. That's right.
Get it all here, baby. You get it all.
Yeah. So we have a couple more super chats here real quick, Vince.
Riza.
Go ahead.
I had it. There it is. Riza, thank you very, very much for the super chat. Can you run through the teams ahead of us, example, Georgia, Bama, and give the thoughts on how you think we would match up? Interested to know if there are multiple teams that you don't think we could hang with outside of the obvious ones.
Well, I don't think there's any obvious ones this year if Notre Dame plays their game. That's the thing is Notre Dame is still an incomplete product to me. And that's why right now I don't have Notre Dame in the top 4. I mean, I have them at 7. Right. That's still several spots out because now, here's the thing. I'll say this. If Notre Dame would have beat Florida State, like they were up 38-20, if they would have closed that game out and won 45-27, And then when they went up 24-16 on Toledo and didn't let Toledo back in the game, or if Kyron Williams doesn't fumble and Notre Dame goes in and scores instead of him fumbling, because they were about to put that game away.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they would have done that, and then if they would have, say not giving up a late score to USC and maybe not giving up a late score to, if they would have won those games convincingly and they just had a bad day against Cincinnati, I'd have Notre Dame ranked higher. I would. But again, it's the totality of what they've done, and they've had a lot of not impressive wins. Right now, Notre Dame doesn't deserve to be in that top 4 conversation. So how they would match up against Georgia and Oklahoma and Oregon right now really doesn't matter a ton. But I've been asked this a couple of times, and I think we'll discuss it more tomorrow, Tuesday night. When we do that show, because we're going on 2 hours now, and I want to save some of that for once we actually know what the rankings look like.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm not convinced. Can you just make a note about this topic? So Reza, we will get to this, but I mean, I think for me, the one team that people are gonna laugh at this. The one team I'd least want to play in the playoff, like the team I just flat out do not want to play, is Oklahoma. Because in football, it's about matchups. Georgia doesn't scare me. If Georgia beats Notre Dame, in my opinion, it'll look a lot like the Alabama game last year. When I mean scare me, I mean like they're not going to go blow Notre Dame out.
Yeah.
Because their offense just isn't good enough. To me, Georgia, is more beatable for Notre Dame than Oklahoma is. Because, again, it's about matchups. Do I think Georgia's a better team than Oklahoma? Yes, it's about matchups, though. And I look at how Notre Dame's secondary right now is, not great. I don't want them going against that Oklahoma pass offense at all. Could Notre Dame put pressure on Caleb Williams? Sure. But that makes me a little bit nervous. And if I felt better about Notre Dame's offense being able to go toe-to-toe with them and score with them, I'd feel a little bit better about that. But I think Oklahoma has a much better defense than North Carolina's. That's the difference to me. Their defense isn't great by any stretch, but it's a lot better than North Carolina's. And so that's kind of how I look at it. So I think that would be the team. Like Oregon, I think Notre Dame matches up well. Is Bama a better team than Notre Dame? Definitely. Yes, they are. Can Notre Dame, if they play their game, hang with and potentially beat Notre Dame? Yeah. LSU almost beat Alabama this weekend, right? Florida, who's now 4-5, had a chance to beat Alabama, right? I've said this before the season, and it's proven to be true. There's no great teams this year. Even Georgia, who's clearly the best team in the country this year, would get curb stomped by the last 3 national champs. That's just what I believe.
I get it.
So this will be a topic that we'll definitely start discussing more and more as we get closer to the final poll. But I do appreciate the super chat, and I wanted to at least address it a little bit and give you that little taste about Oklahoma, because $20 super chat, man. I appreciate that. I didn't want to just be like, hey, appreciate that, but we're not going to talk about it at all tonight. We're going to talk about it tomorrow.
Right.
But we will go in depth as we get closer and closer and closer. But I think Notre Dame, if they play their game, which means the defense plays like it does when it has on its best days, play like you did against Wisconsin, against Purdue, and against Navy, and against USC. Offensively, play like you did during stretches against Florida State. Play like you did for stretches against North Carolina. Play like you did for stretches even yesterday when they started throwing the ball deep and having success. I mean, if they put it all together, I think they can play with and beat anybody. But I just don't know if they're going to do that. That's right. That's why they're 7 and not higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right now. So.
Brendan has a super chat. Thanks for the great work. Notre Dame needs to take advantage of any opportunity to win the college football playoff. Wake up the echoes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I agree.
Thanks, Brendan. Excuse me, not Brandon. Brendan. I'm sure you get that a lot. Okay. There was one. Oh, this is great. Chad Williams. I wonder when the Space Force will get a football team. I think that's funny. I appreciate that, Chad. Thank you. I had to put that one up there.
Good. Goodness. Ladarius had one. What if NASA had a football team?
Same deal. Yeah. I don't know if the Space Force is going to have an academy or whatever, but I'm sure that if it's going to be a legit thing, then you never know.
Yeah,
be playing the Martians or whatever they want to call themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I see, and we are hitting about the 2-hour mark. So, I think that's going to about do it for us tonight,
Yeah,
Brian.
I want to say one quick thing that somebody said too, real quick. Juan Weed says, what you were saying about Oklahoma, that matchup with Oklahoma, is what I feel about Ohio State. Our cornerbacks just don't match up well with their receivers. I agree with that. Offensively, Ohio State concerns me. Here's the difference. I think Ohio State's defense freaking sucks. I think Oklahoma actually has some decent athletes in the secondary. Woody Washington, some other guys. I think Ohio State's defense is garbage.
Yes, they're not good. They're not good.
Now, could Ohio State is Ohio State a better team than Notre Dame right now? I would say yes. That's why I have Ohio State 6 and Notre Dame, or Ohio State 5 and Notre Dame 7. Right,
right.
But I just feel like Oklahoma, to me, has a defense that matches up better against Notre Dame. Plus, Oklahoma runs a 3 down with like a lot of different pressures and things. Ohio State kind of plays straight up. I just feel like, again, this is about matchups, right? I think Ohio State matches up better against Oklahoma than Oklahoma does against Ohio State. But that's not how it goes. It's about who matches up better against Notre Dame. And for me, and again, same with Georgia that somebody else said, I don't think Georgia's, like somebody said, Georgia will beat Notre Dame 30-7. I don't see that. They may only give up 7, but it would be 17-7. And they're not going to beat Notre Dame like that, in my opinion.
Yep.
So
agree.
Anyway, so that's going to be it for tonight, everybody. I appreciate it, everybody, very, very much. Thanks for joining us. This was a fun show. I'm glad you all picked this show because this was a lot more fun than talking more about the triple option.
I don't want to say I was dreading the Navy breakdown, but I wasn't excited about it. I'll just say
that. And just part of it's because of what we – I mean,
nothing changed.
It was a dominant game. There was nothing new. But I appreciate everybody we had like over 200 people voting in that, like in a pretty quick period of time.
Yeah, it was great.
So I appreciate that very, very much. Anyway, everybody have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow at 12:30. Be right back on track. We'll probably dive deeper into some of these games that we kind of talked about the results tonight. We'll kind of dive deeper into it. Some of the games we saw. We'll talk about what Brian Kelly says in his press conference.
Hopefully 14 is going to play.
Yep. And then we'll see. I'm personally just not overly optimistic, but I'm hoping that he does play. But Brendan Armstrong's another one for Virginia. I'm kind of anxiously waiting to see what.
There was an interview with him, and he didn't say he was playing, but he said he feels good.
Yeah.
So.
But I don't know if I'm his coach. I don't know if I'm submitting him to the Notre Dame pass rush with broken ribs. At some point in time, the grown-ups got to say, "Hey, kid, we love your heart, but you got a future ahead of you." You know what I mean? And broken ribs are not a good deal when you've got his offensive line against the Notre Dame pass rush. So we'll see. We'll see. So anyway, everybody have a great night. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, sign up. We had like 5 or 6 people sign up today. So we had a really good day today. Sign up for the message board. Check that out. Boards@irishbreakdown.com. I'm actually going to put the join link in the bottom of the chat right now. But we will see everybody tomorrow. I want to thank everybody for being a part of the show, and thank everybody for being with us tonight and just being along with us for this ride. So have a great night. Vince, thanks for joining me tonight and holding off the hordes at the gate.
I'm literally surrounded right now.
Appreciate that very much. So anyway, have a great night, everybody. We will talk to you again tomorrow.